Hi there, this is Tracy Kiernan from stepbysteppainting.net, and this acrylic painting tutorial will show you how to paint Palm Tree Bay on an 11 by 14 inch canvas. So I will be demonstrating specifically the palm tree painting technique that I use. And we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm doing this on an 11 by 14 inch canvas, and the background and water of this painting consists of three colors: bright aqua green, light blue permanent, and titanium white. And I will be starting off with my 3/4 inch flat wash brush. All the materials, including the colors and the brushes that you'll need for this painting, are listed in the description of this tutorial. So I'm going to start by loading my palette with the bright aqua green, the light blue permanent, and the titanium white. So we're going to be using these three colors to create kind of a blended background. We'll be painting the sky and the water first. So what I'm going to do to help us with the blending of this is apply a very thin layer of water on my canvas. So you can do this a couple ways. You can do this with your clean brush. So just load that in the water and then brush on a very thin layer. I stress a very thin layer because when we add the paint to this, we don't want our paint dripping down to the point where it just kind of thins the paint out too much, because you don't want to put too much water in your acrylics because it would be too thin and be almost like a watercolor. So we just want very thin layer. Another way to do this is to use a fine mist sprayer. So this is just a regular little spray bottle, fine mist. It is dripping bigger droplets, but I just took my brush and just kind of brushed that across. So we have our canvas, and the fact that there's a thin layer of water on our canvas is going to allow the paints to blend more easily and more smoothly. This is a helpful thing, especially for beginners, especially if we're painting like the entire canvas. We're just doing a lot of blending, so it helps speed the process up a little bit and makes it a little bit easier, and makes the paint flow easier too. So we are going to start by double loading our 3/4 inch flat brush, and we're going to use the aqua and the blue and the white. So we're going to use pretty much a combination of all those three colors. So I'm going to just start with the aqua and the blue. So aqua, blue, about equal parts, and white, about equal parts of all three. So triple load. And notice how I didn't blend it all together. So I have like all those three colors, and when I apply that to the canvas, you're going to see that we have some of that turquoise and some of that blue already, and that white is allowing it to get lighter. And we don't want this color to stay consistent all throughout the painting. In fact, we want a nice variety. So this time I'm loading it in just the white, and we have like an area, a streak of brighter white up there in the sky, and then down here we have a streak of more of the blue. The tricky thing about this is that we want to make sure that our strokes are still going kind of all the way across, but if they're not, we want to make sure we kind of smooth out our strokes so we don't have any harsh brush strokes in there. And that can be tricky, especially since we have the thin layer of water on there and it's thinning the paints down. So we just want to kind of go back over some of those strokes really gently. And sometimes I just like to grab that white. That white blends in nicely with the color and kind of smooths out the strokes and helps with the blending. So we don't want to overdo this. And by the way, we're doing this on the entire canvas. So we're going all the way down to the bottom of the canvas. We don't want to over blend. So try not to paint over your color multiple times. I know that can be tempting, especially if you're trying to smooth your strokes out. You want to make sure it's thin, it's very light. So you're using a lot of white in this, and it's streaky. That means that there's blue and the aqua, but it's not all blended together to the same color. This is our water and our sky. So our sky might have some high clouds in the sky, which is why we left those white streaks. Our water might have areas of brighter light blue color and whites, and that's why we left that unblended as well. When we get to the bottom, on purpose I'm doing this. I'm adding a little bit more blue and aqua but less white, just to make it a little bit darker towards the bottom. You don't have to do that. Your painting will turn out fine if you don't do that, but I did that just because the water is a little bit darker towards the bottom. And again, we're going all the way to the bottom. I know that there's land down here on the bottom, but that's okay. We don't really know where that land is going to be yet. We're just applying this as our first layer of paint. So we can see I'm going to leave those white areas in my water, and I'm just going to gently brush over that, but I'm trying not to get rid of all that white. It shouldn't all blend together the same color, so just very lightly. Right now I'm just trying to smooth out some of my brush strokes that are still showing, but again, you don't want to over blend it. A very soft light blue turquoise pastel-y look with that white. So just very gently brush over your strokes. It might help if like you wipe your brush off or clean it all the way, and you can use that. You don't have to apply more paint on it, but you can use a clean brush to smooth out your strokes too if you're worried about over blending. So we're going to leave it like this. We're not going to work it anymore because I want to leave it like this. But I have leftover paint on my palette, so I'm going to use those paint colors to go ahead and paint the sides of the canvas so I don't waste my paints, because after this we're going to let this dry, and our paint colors on our palette might be dry by the time we're ready to use them again. So I'm just going to use those up. Another way you can preserve your paints if you're going to take a break and come back is just to get like some saran wrap and then cover your palette with the saran wrap and come back. So you want to go ahead and let your canvas dry before going on to the next step. So take a break and come back, or use a hair dryer and dry that. It should dry relatively quickly since the first layer is a very thin layer of paint. But then we're going to go ahead and do the land area of our painting. So we're going to divide it up to figure out where the land on the bottom is and where the land in the background is. So I loaded my palette with Hooker's Green Hue Permanent and Unbleached Titanium. I will be using this number 8 round brush. And the next thing we're going to do is super simple. We're going to go ahead and load it in the water and kind of tap it dry on the side and load it with our green. So just the green, maybe a little bit of the unbleached titanium, but not a lot. So maybe like 4 parts green and 1 part unbleached titanium. That just lightens it up a bit. But we're just gonna, on the bottom of our painting, paint a super easy little area of land. Not too high because we need a lot of room for these palm trees. So just maybe a ½ inch high, and it's uneven, so it's kind of wavy, so long wavy strokes all the way across. I'm doing this thing where I'm kind of not blending my colors all the way. You don't have to do that. If you want it just to be solid color and not blend it that way, that's fine. It's just a very basic piece of land on the bottom. So our next piece of land is not exactly in the center of the canvas. It needs to be a little bit lower than the center. So find your center and then go a little bit lower than that. And I used a T-square ruler to kind of help me out. So I positioned my ruler where I wanted that horizon line to be. And so I made sure I was a little bit lower than the center. And then I used the same 2 colors, but I added a little bit more unbleached titanium to that color just to make this land area a little bit lighter. Things in the distance are usually a little bit lighter, so a little bit of that beige color lightened that green up. But same thing, I'm using that ruler to allow the bottom part to be straight and flat, but the top part is an uneven piece of land, so a little bit hilly, but I'm not going too high with it, so just a little bit wavy. And it's okay if a little bit of paint goes under. If you're using that straight edge to line it up, it's okay if a little bit of that paint goes under. We can just call it reflection in the water, but we will add more reflection details in here. So there is our land piece, and that piece of land is not as high as the bottom piece. It's maybe 1/8 of an inch, maybe a little bit less than 1/4 of an inch. It does not go very high. So we have our 2 pieces of land. And next we're going to do the detail reflection lines in the water area. So this is going to make our water look different from our sky. So we're going to load our palette with Turquoise Blue. So this is a new color we're introducing to our palette. And freshen up your titanium white. We'll be using that number 8 round brush still for this. So load it in the water and grab your turquoise. Then grab a little bit of your white to lighten that up. It should still be darker than our first layer of water, so go ahead and test that out. So water reflection lines are longer and larger in the foreground, so towards the bottom of the painting. They're smaller, thinner, more dense and close together, closer to our horizon line, which is that land area in the back of the painting. I did add a little bit of more white to my brush too to make those reflection lines a little bit lighter, but we will be doing another set of reflection lines using just the white here in a little bit. So I'm not doing the water reflection lines on all of the water area. You can see I just left the big gap right there in the middle where that lighter part of the water is. So I want to do this very lightly, but not go too crazy with it to the point where it's just too many lines and it's too busy. So then I'm going to go back with my white, kind of do the same thing, some larger strokes towards the bottom. Kind of pressing my brush a little bit harder right there towards the bottom. I don't want this white to be too pronounced and too bright, so I'm kind of going back over that to kind of dim that down a little bit. And then smaller, thinner, closer together, way in the back. And again, not making too many lines, so I did a few in the middle. I know there's going to be a sun in the sky, and somewhere over here in kind of the middle right part of the water, there's going to be a reflection of the sun, but I'm not going to do anything about that until I do the sun, and then I can go back and add some more white concentrated in that area where the sun would be reflecting. If you want to use a little bit of your aqua or your light blue, you can. Just try not to do too many lines to the point where it's just too busy. So just adding a few more denser, smaller strokes in the back. And then in the middle, they can be kind of in between lines, so they're not too big, not too small, kind of medium-sized lines. And notice how I left kind of the left and right side a little bit blank. Like I'll do a little bit over here on the left, but I know there's going to be a palm tree here, so I don't want to like work that area too much and then it's going to be covered up anyway. So you don't have to put water lines on the left and right side. You can leave that gap open. I'll do maybe a little bit over here on the right. So maybe some lines might be showing behind our palm trees, but I'm not going to pay too much detail in that area. So next we're going to do the trunks of our palm trees. I'm going to be doing the 2 palm trees in the front, so the 2 larger ones. There's 2 larger ones and then there's 3 little ones in the back, but I'm not going to do the little ones until I have my larger ones placed because those ones are kind of the focus of this painting. So I'm going to go ahead and load my palette with Burnt Umber and Mars Black. So we want a very dark base for our trunk. And we're using the number 8 round brush. So I'm going to load my 8 round in brown and add some black. So a little bit higher proportion of brown to black, but it doesn't have to be exact. You just want a very, very, very dark brown. In fact, you can even do this as solid black at first. So we're going to start at the bottom. So I'm going to do my left palm tree trunk. And I found it easier to start at the bottom and then work my way up. So our palm tree needs to be wider at the base and start getting thinner upwards, and it kind of tilts slightly to the right, although we're not going to make it tilt too much. So I'm just going to slowly work my way up, and I found it easier to paint my strokes downwards, but I'm still working up. And the 8 round allows me to create kind of a thin stroke at first and then press hard with the bristles, so that is going to make the stroke be kind of thinner at first and then get a little bit thicker as I work my way down. So you want the size of the palm tree to be kind of an uneven line. It's not a perfectly straight line. It's kind of wavy. So I'm kind of wiggling my brush a little bit to make sure both sides of my palm tree trunk is uneven. And I went to about the halfway point in the sky. So you can see I'm way above that horizon line. And this is a large palm tree. So you want to make sure the top of it is way up there in the sky, about halfway. And then you're just going to repeat the same thing to the other palm tree trunk. So this one's on the right. Same thing, but this one I'm going to make tilt very slightly to the left. So it's kind of a mirror image of the first palm tree trunk, but same technique. It's wider at the base and it gets thinner as we go up. So I'm just gradually building my palm tree trunk by painting, kind of stroking my brush down. Pressing light at first with my brush and then pressing hard as I go down. The sides of the palm tree trunk are uneven and a little bit wavy, and I do that by wiggling my brush. I did not mention that I was dipping my brush in a little bit of water. Sometimes it helps to get that paint to flow a little bit better, especially with these darker colors. So you can add a bit of water in your paint if it feels too thick and it's not creating that kind of a flowy stroke. So next we're going to do the texture of our palm tree trunks, and to do that technique I used a different brush. I used a 3/8 inch angle brush, so a small angle brush. It doesn't have to be this exact size. It could be like a 1/4 inch angle brush, 1/2 inch angle brush. So just a brush that has the angled bristles. I'm going to get my round brush rinsed off and set to the side, and I'll be using the Unbleached Titanium. So I'm going to use that's on my palette there to create the texture. So my trunks are not dry. I did not wait for this to dry to go do this step. So it's recommended that you don't wait for it to dry, because the titanium, the unbleached titanium color, that's this beige color that I'm loading my brush in. So just load that on the tip of the bristles. So it's going to blend with our darker colors. And I'm just going to take the brush and paint an upside down curve stroke. So see how that curves? And I'm not going all the way across. So I'm just highlighting the right side of the tree. And I'll go ahead and do that again. So just kind of a curve, and you can see that darker color is already blending with that. And so I'm just going to go ahead and load my brush, and I'm painting over it a few times just because I like how that's blending. So to get that darker color to blend, you just kind of have to go over it as I do more strokes, working my way up. So these are all inverted curves, so the curves going downwards. So curving stroke using the full width of the brush just on that one side of the palm tree. So it's creating kind of a stripe texture. If you like that, if yours is doing that, yours might not be doing what I'm doing, but I'm going back over that just to kind of make it so the trunk doesn't have stripes. But you can keep that if you like that. So just on that one side, and that creates that texture on the tree. And we can go back on the left side. So I'm loading my brush in that brown. It's kind of brown mixed with a little bit of that beige color. And I'm going to do it on the left side, and it's going to blend with our lighter colors. So I'm going from left to right, but still those curved style strokes, working my way up the tree. And I'm going outside of my trunk line a little bit, but that's okay. And also you want to try not to over blend it, so you can go over your strokes multiple times if you want. Just try not to blend it all to the same color. We want some of the variations of the lighter beige color in our dark to work in favor of making that textured look. So when you get to the top of the trunk, it's kind of a smaller area. You don't have to detail the top very much. It's fine. So we're going to go ahead and do our right palm tree. So I did the highlight on opposite. So this one's going, the lighter part's on the left of side of the trunk. And I did that because my son is going to be in between the palm trees, but you can do it the opposite way. It doesn't matter. But kind of the same technique, doing that curved stroke, using that angle brush, using that beige, curving downwards like an upside down curve, and going up to the top of my tree, trying not to overblend. And then on the right side I did my dark piece, so the darker brown, curving to go over it slightly to let that darker part kind of blend with the lighter part to create the texture of this trunk. So we have different variations of lights and darks, shadowy areas. I'm going to introduce titanium white now. So I went ahead and grabbed some beige and titanium white, kind of mix that together. I want to go in and add some lighter areas on my trunk with that white. So this white's a very strong color. It can take over super fast. You just want to be very careful with it. You can skip this step if you want, if you're kind of don't want to mess with it even more, but I'm using the white here to add some lighter areas of highlight and texture in my tree. And I'm not doing it to all the areas, just some of the areas. You can see just doing that curved stroke on a few of the areas, add some pop of lighter colors so we get even more variety of contrasting colors in our tree trunks. I'm going to leave my tree trunks like this. I can always go back and touch up areas where I want to add more lights or darks, but for now I'm going to let that be, and I'm going to move on to the palm fronds, so the palm tree leaves of this painting, and I'm going to use a different brush for this. So you can do this technique with the angle brush. So like we're going to do our middle line. So we can use the angle brush for all our middle lines, but I found more control in using my 8 round brush. So with this 8 round brush, it's got a nice tip to it, and I can do my middle line with more control. So we're going to do all the middle lines of our palm tree fronds, and I'm going to start with a very dark green. So I mixed a little bit of Mars Black into my Hooker's green and watered it down slightly, and as I'm loading the brush, I'm kind of twisting it to make sure my point is there and that my paint is right there in the tip of the brush, because we want these lines to be very thin. Again, you can do this with the angle brush, but because it's kind of more curved, it was easier to control with the round brush. So I'm just going to paint middle line all around. I'm going to do this all at the point of the palm tree. So where that tip of the palm tree is, I'm just starting at that tip, and then I'm painting each line downwards. It's a curvy line. It goes to a point, so you release your brush to get that line to be more pointed. And I did 6 lines on my palm tree on the left. You can do more or less, and in fact, once we paint all the leaves of these lines, you can decide if you want to make more. So I just did 6 on the one on the left. And then I did 7 on the one on the right. So you can do more or less. And then we're going to set this brush aside and go back to our angle brush for the actual leaves on the palm fronds. And so the trick with this technique is to do a variety of greens. So I'm going to start by mixing my Hooker's green with the white. So it's going to create kind of a tint of that green. And we could do this 2 ways. We can use our brush, like the tip of the brush, and paint each individual leaf, which is fine, but a little bit tedious doing it that way. So in this one, and you can do it both. So I'm just using the tip of the brush like this. I'm just dragging it from the middle piece downwards to create each little individual leaf, or you can use the full width of the brush. So you can use the full width right here and dragging it down in kind of like a curved direction, and that creates more leaves at the same time, and it ends up being quicker doing it that way. And so what I did was I kind of alternated that. So over here on the right, I'm using the tip because I want those leaves to kind of go more at an angle. But you really have like this whole palette of colors to play around with. So don't be intimidated by your colors. You can mix the beige into it, the white, the black. You have all these different ways that you can alter this green. So right here, I'm making this one a little bit darker and kind of shadowy down here on this leaf palm frond area. So I added a little bit more green, tad bit of black to the brush, and you can see how it's creating contrast with this one versus the lighter one I created on the right. So that was just by adding more darker color to my brush, but still the same technique. So you really want to vary your colors. So not all the palm fronds should be the same exact shade of green. They should all be kind of different. So you want to play around with the lights and the darks. So this one I'm going to start out dark, and we can always make them dark and then go back and highlight them, or we can go back and add more shadowy color to it if we want. So this one I'm using more of the width of the brush and just dragging it. That one I'm using the tip of the brush. So just from the middle line, and you just drag outwards. You just kind of quickly do each of the leaves and just release the pressure to kind of get them to go to more of a point at the end. And again, playing around with your different colors right there. I added some more black because I wanted that to be a little bit darker, closer to the trunk right there. It'd be dark and shadowy. Okay, so this one, same thing, using the tip of the brush, and then tip of the brush to create each little individual leaf, or you can use the full width and drag it down. That creates a different effect when you use the full width of the brush. It creates more at the same time. It kind of gives it more of a soft feathery look versus kind of a more sharper look. And again, you can use one technique or the other. I ended up doing both, just kind of alternating, using just the tip and or the full width. So I'm just going to keep going with this, keep filling each of my leaf middle lines with a variety of greens using this angle brush technique, starting each leaf from the center point, dragging the brush outwards. So these palm leaves that are upwards, they're all angling upwards versus the ones that are kind of going downwards. All the palm leaves are angling downwards. So I'm doing some darker pieces right here just to let that stand out from that lighter one that I created in the back of it. Going to go over some of my middle pieces with kind of a darker color, but I'm not going to go over all of them. And then I can create just a few more stray pieces kind of hanging out. Maybe there's a palm frond piece that doesn't have the leaves that are fully opened yet, so I just painted the middle piece and I didn't add the leaves to it. So there is my left palm tree. And then I'm going to repeat this technique over on the right. So I'm going to use the same brush. I recommend when you go to this second tree that you kind of start over with your brush. So go ahead, rinse it off, and then start over. Get it nice and clean. And I'm going to start with dark this time around. So using the green, dipped in a little bit of black. And pick one of the middle pieces to start with. Use the tip of the brush, start in the center, and then drag the brush outwards. These pieces are angling down. And it's okay if this piece even overlaps the water. Maybe that's a longer palm frond that dips down and overlaps our water. There's nothing wrong with overlapping. and this side, using more of the full width of the brush for that one. So you might find you want to kind of vary the angles, so maybe these leaves are kind of more angled backwards, and then these ones down here are more dangling downwards. So all of these I'm doing dark. So what I'm going to do is, once I'm done painting all of these, I'm going to go back and highlight some of them. So I'm not going to keep it dark throughout. So that's something else you can do differently. You can paint all your leaves dark and then go back and add your lighter colors in there. Or you can do what I did in the palm tree on the left. Instead of doing them all dark first, I kind of alternated dark and light so I don't have to go back over and highlight in a later step. So these ones are going to be angling upwards. So I'm just really kind of holding that brush very lightly, not putting too much pressure on it to get those fine feathery strokes. And then this one is going to have more pieces dangling downwards. So with those strokes, I'm kind of curving them a bit. And then I'm going to go in with my white. So the white's going to lighten up some of these leaves. I'm going to go back over some of them and give the palm leaves some more color variation. So as I'm highlighting these palm fronds, I'm not trying to cover up all of the dark. I'm not trying to get rid of all the dark. I'm trying to just go over, a lot of these I just went over half of one side and left the other side dark. So that gives the nice variation of darks and lights. I also left an opening for the sun. So the sun is going to be kind of peeking through next to our right palm tree. So see if you can leave an opening for your sun as well. So you can go back in and you can add more palm leaves if you want, make it more fuller. But just keep in mind, we got to put a sun in there. So leave some sky still showing through. I'm going back over these with a little bit more of the lighter green. Again, keep in mind that we want to still have a lot of that dark showing through and try not to over blend it to where it all turns the same kind of green. You want a nice variety of greens and lights and darks. Next, we're going to paint our sun, so go ahead and rinse that off. Our sun is going to go over here in the upper right, so wherever there's an opening in your palm tree palms, you can find a little spot for your sun. And I'm using titanium white and a number 4 round brush, and I'm just going to paint a very simple, small circle. Then I'm going to add some dry brush strokes around the circle. This is optional. If you don't like how this looks, you don't have to do this, but this gives some like a glowing effect around the sun. So I only have a little bit of white paint on the tip of the brush, and this is very dry brush style, so it should not be very opaque. It should be translucent, dry, and feathery. It's going around that circle. It's also a good way to disguise if you didn't paint your circle as a perfect circle. It looks more like an oval, and But the rings around that sun gives it that glowing look. So I did rings, and some of those rings overlapped my palm a little bit, but that's okay. And then we have our reflection from the sun. So in this little area below our sun, I'm just going to go back in and add some more reflection lines in the water. So this is still the number 4 round brush, and I'm using titanium white. And I'm going in there and adding extra white lines in this area, trying to keep a little bit of that perspective thing going with the longer, thicker lines towards the bottom and kind of thinner ones in the back. But just a pop of extra white in there to help make that look like it's glowing in the water. Then we have 3 more palm trees to do, but I promise these ones are way easier. They're smaller, they're in the distance on that far land that we painted earlier. So on my palette, I'm just mixing a light brown with the burnt umber and the titanium white using my number 4 round brush. So just mix about equal parts brown and white together. And then we can go in and do our 3 little palm tree trunks. So we can have them kind of bending slightly, or if you don't want them to be bending, you can have them going straight up. They are thinner at the top and a little bit thicker at the base, but very simple, just 3 little lines that go to the land area. And then we can do our palm fronds for those. And for that, I didn't even rinse my brush off. I just grabbed the green, and of course it's going to look kind of brownish green because I didn't rinse my brush off, but that's okay. And I'm just doing the middle lines. But I'm not going to go in and add too many details to these because these are further in the distance, so they're a little bit more abstract and they're smaller. We don't see that many details. So I'm just taking that and just kind of dragging those lines all around that top part of the trunk. So I'm going to wipe my brush off and grab more green and do the same thing for our other palm trees. So I'll just start at the top and drag each line kind of outwards. So I'm not doing all the individual palm leaves, I'm just doing lines, and a lot more lines than I did for the bigger ones, but this also helps to make them look like they're a little bit fuller. And varying that white, that green, so I grabbed a little bit of white to make this one a little bit brighter. Grabbing some different greens and just kind of mixing my green with the white, and just lines that kind of go outwards in kind of a starburst formation, just in a radial direction around the top part of our tree trunk. So that's it. That's very simple. We can go in and we can highlight these, add more colors if you want, make them more fuller toward the bottom, but really they're simplified because they're further in the distance. On the base of each of the trees, I just added a little bit of green to make the base part a little bit darker. And then we can do the reflection. So I'm watering down this black slightly with a little bit of water. And I'm just going to drag that down. Our reflection is very abstract. This is a very watered down brown, and I just did vertically down in the water. So that creates the illusion that the tree is reflecting in the water just by doing that very thin vertical stroke. And then for the green, I'm doing little tick marks that are going kind of in a horizontal direction, kind of forming that area where that top part of the tree is. It's very abstract. We don't have to do a lot of details with this, just enough to give the impression that our tree is reflecting in the water. And then when that dries, we can go back over with some more water lines. If you want to add little white water lines over your reflection, you can. So next I'm going to do some sparkles everywhere, so our trees are kind of glistening with the sun. And I'm going to be doing that with my round brush. You can do this with the 4 round or the 8 round. And right now I'm using the foreground and titanium white. So I'm going to start by just painting little dots. So kind of in the middle area, little dots that kind of create the impression that the sun is hitting the leaves right here and kind of making it glisten and sparkle. And we are going to paint little sparkle lines as well. For the sparkle lines, you just do like a little plus sign. And I found that using the 8 round brush was more helpful for making these little plus marks, little stars that I'm painting in the water here, because the 8 round has a very, very fine point to it to where it can create these very thin lines. You can also do this with a white paint pen if you want more control over it, but you're just creating like a little star using just the white in the water, and that's going to create the impression that the water is sparkling in some areas. And I did it mostly where the sun is reflecting. I didn't do sparkles everywhere, so where that kind of extra white is in the water, I did some of the sparkles. And then I'm going to go back over some of my palm tree reflection with the white, just doing a few little horizontal strokes that overlap the reflection. And then a few more sparkles. You can go crazy with these sparkles and do as many as you want. You can do larger ones, smaller ones. It really creates kind of a magical effect with the water. You can add some sparkles in the tree as well. So you can go in there and do your little plus signs in the tree. So maybe some of the sun is causing the tree to kind of reflect and glisten some more. I know we did some white dots, but we can do some sparkles in there as well. And I'm also taking this opportunity to kind of add some pops of white / lighter green in some of the leaves. And then I add some pops of white in the palm trees in the back. You just don't want to go too crazy highlighting everything. A few more sparkles. And then I also did a few touch-ups with the tree trunks. I wanted to add some pops of lighter color in there. This is all just touch-ups. You don't have to do what I'm doing. If you think it's finished, you can stop whenever you're ready. But I'm just going in here, more little sparkles and white lines. And then the tree trunk. So I added some pops of white, not everywhere, but in some of the areas. I took that brush and I did like the little curvy lines just to make that a little bit lighter in some of the areas of the tree trunk. And this is the conclusion of how to paint Palm Tree Bay. I hope that my palm tree painting technique was helpful for you and that you enjoyed this painting. Thanks for watching and thanks for painting with me.